Here in Ireland, you only see JCB. Walk onto any job site in County Cork or Staffordshire or the outskirts of Manchester, and the yellow machine digging the trench is almost never American. It is a JCB 3CX backhoe loader, built by a family-owned British firm, and the operator running it will tell you flatly that Caterpillar is a rare sight on home turf. That is not an accident, and it is not nostalgia. It traces back to two dates. In 1953, JCB built the first hydraulic backhoe loader in the world, the Mark I. Caterpillar did not bring its own first backhoe loader to market until 1985. That is a 32-year lag in the single machine that defines a construction site. JCB was founded in 1945 by Joseph Cyril Bamford in Staffordshire, England, and it is still owned by the Bamford family. Caterpillar, by contrast, spent those same decades answering to Wall Street, and the men who ran it learned to put financial engineering ahead of product engineering. This is the story of how Britain quietly stopped buying American construction equipment. If this is your first time here, subscribe. We document the corporate decisions inside the boardrooms that hollowed out one of the most respected industrial brands of the 20th century, country by country. The data tells the story, and the British and Irish job site is one of the clearest data points there is. You can see it in the equipment, you can hear it from the operators, and you can trace it back to the choices made in conference rooms, thousands of miles from any trench. Start with the setup, because for most of the 20th century, Caterpillar was the global standard. The yellow Caterpillar bulldozer was the machine that built the Hoover Dam, paved the interstate highways, and followed the United States Army across the Pacific. The Caterpillar D9 dozer and the big Caterpillar excavators were genuine engineering monuments. When a contractor in Texas or Ohio needed iron that would not quit, the Caterpillar dealer was the obvious call. The brand carried a kind of industrial authority that few American companies ever matched. On open-pit mines and major earth-moving jobs, Caterpillar still commands respect, and the large mining trucks rolling through quarries in Australia and Chile remain a serious business. But while Caterpillar was building its reputation on the biggest machines in the world, Joseph Cyril Bamford was building something different in a small rented garage in Staffordshire. He started in 1945 with a war surplus welder and a vision for farm equipment. Within a few years, he was building tipping trailers, then hydraulic loaders, and he kept asking a simple question that the American giants had not bothered to answer. What if one machine could do two jobs? What if a single tractor-based chassis could carry a loading shovel on the front and a digging arm on the back, so a contractor did not need to own and transport two separate machines? In 1953, he answered it. The JCB Mark I was the first machine to combine a front loading shovel and a hydraulic rear excavator arm on a single chassis. That is the backhoe loader, and JCB invented the category. Sit with the timeline, because it is the spine of this entire story. JCB shipped a working hydraulic backhoe loader in 1953. Caterpillar, the largest construction equipment manufacturer on the planet, did not field its own backhoe loader until 1985, 32 years. For more than 3 decades, the machine that does the most common work on the most common job site, digging utility trenches, footings, drainage, the everyday earth moving that fills a contractor's week, was a machine that Caterpillar simply did not make. The British contractor learned to dig with a JCB because there was no American alternative in the yard. By the time Caterpillar arrived to the party, an entire generation of British and Irish operators had already grown up on the JCB controls, trained their apprentices on JCB hydraulics, and stocked their workshops with JCB parts. You do not undo 32 years of muscle memory with a late entry and a paint job. Understand what a 32-year head start actually does to a trade, because it is not just a number on a timeline. Skill on a backhoe loader is not transferred from a brochure. It is built into the hands of an operator over thousands of hours. The feel of a particular set of levers, the way a particular hydraulic circuit loads up under a heavy bucket, the rhythm of swinging the rear arm and reaching for the front shovel without thinking about it. For more than 3 decades, every apprentice on a British or Irish site learned that rhythm on a JCB, because a JCB was the only backhoe loader within reach. The foreman who trained them had learned on a JCB, the mechanic who kept the machine running had learned on a JCB. The hire yard that supplied the local contractors stocked JCB, because that was what every operator on the books already knew how to run. By the 1980s, an entire profession had standardized itself, quietly and completely, around one manufacturer's controls. When Caterpillar finally brought a backhoe loader to market in 1985, it was not walking into an open field. It was walking into a trade that had already chosen, trained, and equipped itself around a rival, and had been doing so since before many of those operators were born. Now the part that explains why the gap was allowed to open in the first place. Caterpillar is a public company, and through the back half of the 20th century, and into the 2000s, its executives increasingly answered to once master, the shareholder. The MBA culture that took over American boardrooms taught a generation of managers to treat a manufacturer as a financial instrument first and an engineering company second. Quarterly earnings calls set the rhythm. Return on invested capital and earnings per share became the language of the executive floor, and the satisfaction of an operator standing in a trench rarely entered the conversation. When you run a business to please Wall Street every 90 days, you optimize for the machines that throw off the most margin, the giant mining and earth-moving iron, and you are slow to chase a smaller, cheaper, fiercely competitive product like the backhoe loader, even when it is the most common machine in the world. There is a particular logic the Harvard Business School taught a generation of executives, and it ran directly against the backhoe loader. The teaching was to harvest the high-margin product, to manage the portfolio toward whatever line returned the most capital, and to leave the low-margin, labor-intensive, fiercely contested segments to someone else. By that logic, the backhoe loader was a problem, not an opportunity. It was cheap, it was crowded. The buyer was a price-sensitive contractor rather than a mining conglomerate, and the margin was thin. A spreadsheet built on shareholder primacy would tell you to skip it. So Caterpillar effectively did, for 32 years, even though that thin margin machine was the single most common piece of equipment on the world's job sites and the daily companion of millions of contractors. The financialized executive looked at the everyday trench and saw a rounding error. The family-owned engineer looked at the same trench and saw the whole business. Watch where that logic eventually took the company physically. In 2017, Caterpillar announced it was moving its global headquarters out of Peoria, Illinois, the gritty manufacturing town it had called home for nearly a century, to the Chicago area. In 2018, it confirmed the headquarters would land in Irving, Texas. The corporate explanation was about access to global talent and customers and airports. The quieter signal was unmistakable. The men running Caterpillar wanted to sit closer to financial markets and executive amenities, and further from the factory floor where the actual machines were welded together. A company that moves its brain away from its hands is telling you exactly what it values. The headquarters followed the money, not the metal. Compare that directly with how JCB was governed across the very same decades. The Bamford family owns JCB outright. There are no outside shareholders demanding a dividend, no activist investors agitating for a spin-off, no quarterly earnings call where an analyst in a glass tower asks why margins slipped half a point. That single structural fact changes everything about how the company behaves. Because the family answers to engineers and customers instead of to a stock ticker, JCB can do something a public company struggles to do. It can take the long view. It can pour profit back into research and product instead of shipping it out the door to Wall Street. It can defend a low-margin flagship like the backhoe loader for decades, not because a spreadsheet says it maximizes return this quarter, but because it is the machine that built the brand and the machine the customer actually wants. Sit with what freedom from the earnings call really buys an engineering company, because it is more than a slogan. A public manufacturer plans in 90-day windows, because that is how often it has to stand in front of analysts and defend the numbers. A cut in research spending makes the next quarter look better, so the temptation is permanent. The family-owned firm is under no such pressure. JCB can spend on a product that will not pay back for years, can keep a thin-margin flagship alive through a downturn, and can refuse to gut its engineering bench to flatter a single quarter because no outside investor has the stand to demand otherwise. When you do not have to explain a margin dip to Wall Street every 90 days, you are free to do the patient, unglamorous, expensive work of making the machine better year after year. That freedom is exactly what a public company trades away the day it sells shares, and it is exactly what the Bamford family kept. One company optimized for the next earnings report, the other optimized for the next 30 years. That patience compounded into product. The JCB 3CX became the default backhoe loader across Britain, Ireland, and much of the world. The machine you picture when someone says the word backhoe. It earned a reputation for hydraulics that an operator could feel through the levers, for parts you could get from a dealer the same day, and for a resale value that held because every contractor in the country already knew how to run. Then JCB did it again with the Loadall, the telescopic handler that became as common on British farms and building sites as the backhoe itself. The Loadall took the same philosophy, one versatile machine doing the work of several, and made JCB the dominant name in telehandlers, the same way the 3CX made it dominant in backhoes. These were not financial products. They were tools designed by people who understood that the customer was a contractor with a deadline and a tight margin, not an analyst with a model. Look more closely at why those two machines own the British and Irish site, because it is not just the engineering. The 3CX earned its place by doing the work the trade actually does. It digs the footings and the drainage, it loads the muck away, it backfills, and it does all of it on one chassis that a contractor can drive between jobs without a low loader. The Loadall did the same trick for lifting and stacking. It reaches up to feed a scaffold, places a pallet of blocks on the second lift, handles the muck, and folds away the need for a forklift and a separate loader. One machine, several jobs. Exactly the philosophy of the Mark I carried forward. For a small contractor running tight margins, a versatile British machine that earns its keep on every kind of task is worth more than a specialist that sits idle half the week. That is why these two machines, more than any other, define the yellow iron on a British or Irish site, and why the contractor reaching for them is making the shrewd commercial call, not a sentimental one. There is also an economy that grows up around a machine like that, and it locks the advantage in. Britain and Ireland run on plant hire, on the contractor who rents a backhoe or a telehandler for a job rather than buying one outright, and the hire fleets are built on JCB because that is what every operator can run on day one. When the hire yards stock JCB, the operators stay trained on JCB, and the next buyer chooses JCB, so his machine slots straight into that same hire and resale market. The resale value holds precisely because the demand is universal, and the parts are everywhere precisely because the fleet is everywhere. A worn pump or a cracked bucket pin is on the dealer's shelf or in the local factor's stock the same day, so a JCB is rarely off the job for long. Each of these facts feeds the next. Strong resale supports new sales, dense parts supply supports resale. A trained operator pool supports the hire fleet, and the hire fleet keeps the operator pool trained. It is a self-reinforcing ecosystem, and once it is running at full strength, a latecomer cannot simply buy his way into it with a competitive list price. Caterpillar in 1985 was trying to break into a market that had already closed the loop without it. Here is the difference made plain. Caterpillar spent those decades getting very good at being a public company, managing its balance sheet, rewarding its shareholders, moving its headquarters toward the money. JCB spent those same decades getting very good at building the machine in front of a working man. One optimized for the earnings call, the other optimized for the trench, and on a British or Irish job site, the trench is the only thing that votes. So look at where it all stands in 2026. Drive through a construction site in Dublin or Birmingham or anywhere across the British Isles, and the yellow machine is overwhelmingly a JCB. The 3CX is still digging the trenches. The Loadall is still stacking the pallets and lifting the blocks. The dealer network, the parts supply, the trained operators, the second-hand market, all of it runs on JCB, and all of it reinforces itself. A contractor buys another JCB because the last three were JCB, because his mechanic knows them, because the part is on the shelf, and because resale is strong. Caterpillar, on these particular job sites, is the rare machine, the one that turns ahead, precisely because you do not expect to see it. The American giant that was once the global standard became, on JCB's home turf, the exception rather than the rule. It still rules the open pit mine and the massive earth-moving contract, but the everyday British job site, the one that defines the trade, was lost a long time ago, and it was lost in a boardroom, not on the ground. Be precise about what Caterpillar kept and what it surrendered, because the split is the whole lesson. The company never lost the mine. On the open pit, on the major earth-moving contract, on the kind of job where a single buyer orders giant iron by the fleet and a Caterpillar dealer flies a specialist out to keep it running, Caterpillar still wins, and it wins on merit. The big dozer and the mining truck remain serious machines that serious operations rely on. But the mine is a narrow world of large customers and large orders. The everyday job site is the broad one. Millions of contractors digging millions of trenches, and that is the ground Caterpillar never recovered. By chasing the high-margin giant and skipping the low-margin everyday machine for 32 years, the company ended up exactly where its own financial logic pointed it. It kept the segment a spreadsheet loves, and it lost the segment that defines the trade. That was not bad luck. That was the strategy working precisely as designed. None of this is the operator's fault. And none of it is the buyer's fault. The British contractor who fills his yard with JCB is making the smart, rational, professional choice, the better machine, the better support, the better resale, the home-built tool he can actually rely on. The failure sits entirely upstairs, with the executives and the MBA culture and the shareholder-first logic that treated a 32-year head start in the world's most common construction machine as someone else's problem. The operators read the situation correctly decades before the boardroom did. If you have run a JCB or a Caterpillar on a British or Irish job site, drop the brand and the model in the comments and tell me which one you would put your own money on. Let us see how many of us watched this happen in real time, on real job sites. Before any boardroom in Texas admitted it, the 3CX versus whatever Caterpillar parked next to it, the load-all versus the competition, the parts availability, the resale, the hydraulics under load. You know the difference because you have felt it through the levers, and that is the kind of evidence no quarterly report ever captures. In the end, the story is almost endearingly simple. A family-owned British company invented the backhoe loader in 1953 and spent the next 70 years defending it because no shareholder could order them to stop. An American giant run for the stock price and steered by men who moved their headquarters toward the financial markets and away from the factory floor, showed up to the same machine 32 years late and never recovered the ground. The British and Irish operators who chose JCB chose patient family engineering over Wall Street, and they saw the difference long before any boardroom admitted it. You can argue that Caterpillar still makes the better big machine, the better mining truck, the better dozer, and you may be right. But on the job site that actually defines the trade, the everyday trench in the everyday town, the home team won, and it was never close. The operators who saw it coming already know. Subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.